All right. Hello, can you hear me? Yes, you can. I can hear myself. Thank you. Welcome to this session with title Failing is Not an Option, Language Quality Management in the Age of Large Language Models and AI. I am beyond thrilled to present these three fantastic panelists. We have here on stage more than 60 years of localization industry experience without revealing anything on age. We have Katerina Gasova, Global Quality Solution Strategist at Argos Multilingual. She's a guru in quality management, so exploit the situation, ask her all the questions you always wanted to ask about quality management. She's also a member of the MQM Council and very involved in the creation of the ISO standards as well. We have Lucia Guerrero, Machine Translation Manager at Expedia and also university teacher. Lucia has also been a co-founder of the Gala Machine Translation Post-Editing Training Special Interest Group. Also something to check afterwards. And then we have Jennifer Vela Valido, Localization Quality Program Manager at Spotify. She also holds a PhD in Localization Quality Management. And with that, I think I will let Katka begin with a very interesting presentation. So enjoy.
So, hello everyone, nice afternoon to all of you. And yes, me as a grandma in the industry, I have taken the liberty to act as kind of a moderator and then facilitator of the discussion. And looks to me that I'm the only representative of service providers in this panel. So I will try my best to bring in the perspectives of our challenges, being the service providers who always want to please our customers and make them happy, because this is why we are here for. To set the scene, so what you see in front of you, if you look at this, you may want to say, oh, well, what's new in that? Actually nothing. This is all of the stuff we've been doing here for ages if we want to do the quality management, if we want to succeed with our deliverables. Our industry is about humans. We've got different technologies and it's always been here. So, but what do we do now with all of the technologies? They are coming every day, they are overwhelming us, and how to navigate in that world. So, yes, we have to think about us being at the core, not in the loop, but at the core. It makes a difference. And also being the ones who think, who are behind all of the wonderful stuff that is ahead of us. And together with Jennifer, when getting ready for the webinar we delivered about a month ago, I think, for Gala, we just were thinking about, so how do we call today's world? And we believe it could be named something like Land AI-scape, because it's the known landscape with the AI touch. In our today's panel, we will cover bits and pieces of the tasks that you see here, or the activities that you see here. We definitely do not have ambitious end times to cover, for instance, global source readiness, which is very important, of course, because everything starts with the source, or at the source, or actually does it, you will learn. And it's also interesting that, me not being an expert, I at least checked out for a couple of, say, research studies which confirm that prompting on code readiness and code quality is not so easy as prompting for language quality, which was a very interesting thing or finding to me. And at the end of our presentation, you'll see or you'll find a couple of links to different research works that we've built our discussion topics on. And one of those links also will bring you to the research study on code readiness, We also will not be touching terminology, even though terminology is super vital in the area of language models. It's gaining importance. It's more important than it has ever been before, because with correct terminology, this is the way how to train the LLMs and how to improve them and how to ensure quality. But again, there is other sessions. I think Klaus is not in this room, but there is a follow-up on the Gala Terminology Academy in one of the sessions. I think it's delivered tomorrow, so don't miss that one, and you will learn information from the true expert. What we will do, however, is we will try to throw more light on how language models are being used today for quality evaluation. And because we now are focusing on language models, so the question is, how can we leverage, or can we at all leverage, the potential of innovative technologies? Obviously, the answer is yes, but then how to do it? And there is a couple of caveats that we have to understand. One of the first and most important things is to do a quality check at the beginning. It's about terminology. We all use same words. Do we use those words as terms with exactly the same meaning for all of us? We've got an expert with us, Lucia.
Thank you, Katka, for your kind words. And thank you for introduction, Laura. Hello, everyone. And yes, you just said I'm an expert. What I want to say is that most of the people who know me, they know that I don't have a strong technical background. I come from a linguistic background, so I try to do my best to bring this technical or technical baseline before we deep dive into the other topics. So first of all, I think everyone has already said that, and it's been said, it's been written, but I would like to insist in the fact that if you are using machine translation, then you are also using AI, because neural machine translation is a part of AI as well. Sorry to insist, but I think this is important to mention. Now, the question is, how do we know that LLMs are good for evaluation? I think we can do so by looking at how these models are built and by comparing with neural machine translation. So, for example, with neural machine translation, they share the same architecture. They are using the transformer architecture and the attention mechanism. I'm not going to go too deep into that because it's going to be a bit boring and we're going to consume time, but just be aware that even if it's the same, they use many more parameters. They don't use the encoder-decoder technology as NMT, so the encoder is to process the input and the decoder is to process the output, so they only use the decoder, and that makes LLMs very much more efficient and faster than neural machine translation. This is interesting. And then I also want to highlight that they are very versatile, the versatility. How comes? Because they are trained with vast amounts of data. And you would say, yes, neural machine translation too, but this is a step beyond. They use vast amounts of data, multiple sources, and in multiple languages. This data doesn't have to be aligned as with NMT, and it doesn't have to be labeled, so first difference. And then also, they have self-improvement capabilities. This is also super interesting and new for us. They have this transfer learning capability by which they can transfer the knowledge they have in one domain or task into a new domain or task, and they can also self-improve with the use of different prompting techniques and also with the help of human feedback. So I think these are the two main differences. And then at some point we found out that LLMs, even if they were not created for translation, they can translate indeed, and then somebody was just wondering at some point, if they can translate, maybe they can evaluate as well. And I want to throw this question to Jennifer. Can LLMs evaluate translation quality?
Well, in theory, yes. I mean, large language models are models that have been created to do tasks related to language. So yes, if they can create content, if they can translate content, then they can't evaluate. But I think I would like to actually go back a little bit more on the part of the terminology part, because I think it's very important for us to, when we're communicating to each other, when we're communicating with new clients, other clients, to make sure that we're using the right terms when we talk about AI and large language models and machine translation. Because on the client side, as you probably have seen, right, AI is a hype where we do believe we can use AI for everything and anything. And sometimes some departments go maybe to the localization team on the client side and say, hey, I've heard that now you can use AI for everything. You can use AI for content generation, translation. Drop everything that you're using. Drop this machine translation that you're doing. That's an old technology. Do it with AI. And as we all know, but we really have to be very clear on that, neuro-machine translation is AI. It's based on the same machine learning technologies. It actually was created specifically for translation, right? So that's why there's a lot of experiments now. There is pros and cons. We're not going to go there which one is best. But what is for sure is that neuro-machine translation was created to be is optimized for translation, while large language models are not optimized for one task, but for many tasks, right? So then it comes back to, it is possible for them to do evaluation, yes, but will be able to maybe solve some issues, some challenges that we had in the past, like, for example, the use of intensive manual labor. Yes, actually, that is going to allow us to automate things in quality management. But at the same time, it might pose with new challenges, with new issues that didn't exist before. So one very common example is the hallucination phenomenon that we have with large language models. So we have to take that into consideration for translation, but also for evaluation, right? If we have moments in which that evaluation is actually not factually correct, then that evaluation is not going to be how much can we trust something that we know at some point might be wrong, right? So it's very interesting to see how we have caveats, but also we have new caveats that we still are probably not even aware of, and we need to experiment, and we need to continue the experimentation with that.
In continuation of our discussion we had yesterday as part of the Young Conference, it's also important to think about the fact that we really, even on our service provider side, even though it's very tempting to try to do everything and think AI will resolve my problem, no, we have to take a deep breath and step back, and we have to think, how do we decompose the job of the language quality to the management, to the individual tasks, so building a bridge between what we're talking right now to what we heard this morning. It's just a different way of tackling the things. Instead of thinking of rules, we need to crack down, as it was nicely mentioned yesterday, all of the ambitions into the individual tasks and focus on things, identified which tasks do really matter to us, and focus on experimenting around those. We should not forget about the linguists, because it's, again, super tempting vision that technology is omnipotent. You can get enormous amount of data and information in a second, but then how has this to be digested and worked with by a linguist? That's a big question, apart from how much can we trust LLMs and when. So it's about collaboration and knowledge sharing, which means, in general, we know that LLMs are fundamentally reshaping our industry. And again, we've mentioned that right now we will not be looking into how those can be used for source content global readiness analysis or content profiling. We have to be aware of the fact that those two are super vital for us as well, because if we now are shifting from what one-size-fits-all quality attitude into diversified, fit-for-purpose, use-case-driven quality management, we need to understand what type of a content we're working with, how to describe and categorize the content, and then how to define what to expect in terms of quality definitions, in terms of user perceptions, in terms of product quality itself, and in terms of process definition. So instead of going into those quite huge topics, which would be for a webinar or session per se, let's look into the newly reshaped language technology ecosystems in the light of LLMs.
Yeah, if you ask me what's the biggest disruption of LLMs into the localization ecosystem, I always think of the fact that we seem to be moving from a linear pipeline in which, I think this was mentioned before this morning in one of the sessions already, it's not anymore that we are creating the source and then translating into one target, two targets at different texts, and then we evaluate those texts by comparing them to the source. LLMs are now allowing us to create content in multiple languages at the same time. So where's the source, where's the target? That's not the case anymore. All the languages are pushed up to the source. This is multilingual content creation happening simultaneously. And this has a huge impact first on time to market, of course. You can reduce it enormously, and this is a super big opportunity for all companies. And also, I think we have the opportunity to be super granular in terms of adaptation to markets. But then this granularity, so when you want to when you want to perform your evaluation of this multilingual content, how do you do that? Because we are used to compare segment by segment, source to target. How do we do that? Again, throwing my question to Jennifer.
So the great thing about measuring quality or quality evaluation, I do think that there is a huge, huge opportunity for the use of large language models for quality evaluation. And it actually can help us to solve two, potentially maybe three of the main gaps that we see in quality evaluations. One of them is, as I mentioned, how labor intensive if we would like to be able to evaluate as much as possible, but it takes time, it takes a lot of resources, a lot of money, and then you try to do it with sampling, but how you choose that sampling, we don't have still the technology at our hands to be able to do sampling in a smart way. So we actually, with TMSs, they are mostly always focused on translation and not so much on quality management. We don't have that. And then we also have the subjectivity of quality evaluation done by humans. Even if they have a great training, even if they have a lot of experience, we can find in some cases how the level of quality seems to drop or go higher when the evaluator is actually a different person. And also depending on the cultures, on the languages. Some languages seem to have consistently a lower quality level than others, and it's very related to actually a cultural environment and the perceptions to quality. So having a machine here, having a large language model that can be objective and consistent in the evaluation can actually help with those gaps. But then going back to what you're saying, I think it's very exciting because traditionally when we do evaluation, quality evaluation, we do have our metrics like MQM for translation, right? Translation only. Maybe with a couple of tweaks, you could use it for transcreation because you still have a source. But now when we have a content, a text that has been created either with, for a creation of the content, so has been created directly in the target source, or it has been adapted for cultural reasons. Which kind of metrics do we use that? Can we use NQM? Do we have the right error issues there? So while NQM, for example, it's true that it's very, very focused on translation, my vision for this is that the same way that many, many years ago if some of you might remember, when machine translation came, we actually had different human evaluation metrics for machine translation. Actually, the categories were different. We had fluency, readability, right? So we had like 2 different types of scorecards depending on whether it was machine translation or human translation. But then we came together and we said, no, we actually can have just one framework that is able to evaluate no matter the production method. So I'm thinking that potentially, and I would love to work on that, potentially we can take a look to the hyperdimensions of MQM and see, can we use MQM to evaluate the linguistic quality, no matter if it is translation, transcreation, content creation, or adaptation? I don't know. I would like to think that it's possible, and I would like to go that way so we can have just one framework for everything, and things can be also more optimized in that sense. But I think that should be the way to go.
I do agree with you, and I wanted just to add something, and is that I have hope that we will finally get some metric that can allows us to analyze this multilingual content creation. I was just thinking some years ago when we started analyzing machine translation with the automated metrics, and we've got BLEU, we've got other metrics that are reference-based, and at some point with neural machine translation, we realized that those are not really working well when you don't have a reference, and when your reference can be any potential translation. So hopefully also neural metrics will help us a lot when trying to evaluate this new ecosystem of having multiple content created simultaneously.
Potentially we'll have to work on, so the metrics for, of course, but also what is the reference material that we use for the evaluation. Of course, when we have content creation, we don't have a source, but we do have the project description, we do have potentially the brief, right? That is the part of the reference text that we will need to take a look at to be able to evaluate whether the content that has been created complies with the parameters set by the client or with the parameters of the project. So that part could be there.
Like reference understood as the instructions that the LLM has to follow to produce that content, right?
Yes, but also the goals. Like, why are you creating this content? What is the goal of this content? Is the target content actually complying with those goals? So that's great because then you can measure things potentially, right? Like tone of voice, how engaging it is. Things like, again, it's very important when you are doing content creation because what you want is the text to sound as natural as possible, and it doesn't matter that you change certain things.
I believe that when talking about MQM, if you look in all of the research papers or in the vast majority of research papers, so this is the framework that is the most frequently used ones for the attempts to use LLMs to evaluate systems. There is some limitations, of course. There is big challenges related to the fact that currently a lot of work has been done into segment-level evaluations and not document-level evaluations. The latest researches show how to experiment with how to shift the segment-level evaluation into the document-level evaluations. Again, there is some links to some materials available, but indeed, whoever attended our session on the standards this morning, so you might have heard about new standards being worked on or having been released lately in regards to the evaluation of the translation output. It relates to analytic evaluations by errors. However, MQM committee does not wait here, and it's already working on how to tackle the concept of going beyond the analytics so that we really can also consider, it's called hyperdimensions, so stuff that can only heavily be, or it's very difficult to cover it by the individual error categories such as cohesion, coherence, appropriateness, cultural appropriateness, etc. And those exactly are now the nuts that the MQM committee is trying to crack. Cautious of the time also, let's look into, say, a couple of examples of strategies where AI is being used and how do we experiment. And I believe, from what I have heard personally so far, everybody is on it. Buyers, service providers, technology producers, everybody tries to figure out how do I do it as fast as possible with the help of AI, and experiments are around AI-assisted post-editing. I can tell you I checked several outputs, and I am still confused. I know it's the way to go, but then how to identify where the LLM has really helped and has really improved the output. Just on an example of 100 strings, 50 strings were really improved, and then 10 strings contained serious errors or major errors, both in MT port. It was GenAI generating MT as well as NMT, so it happened. And then in the AI-assisted post-edited part, how do I identify quickly which is the 10 strings? I have to read everything, so where's the benefit? I had to read everything before in the post-editing. I have to do it right now because I don't know how to trust. And where is on the segment level score, where is the cutoff limit? Not speaking about the amount of information I, as a researcher, have to understand, have to read to figure out what are the particular patterns. Yes, it's the technology of the future. It's what everybody is talking about, but when it's going to be here in a reliable shape that really helps. I would like to be very optimistic about this one, but I don't know.
Katka, I have a question for you about the AI assistant post-editing, because I've heard, but I haven't experimented with that myself, that in some of the cases with AI assisted post-editing, there was over-editing, meaning that...
I've seen that too.
Right? Mm-hmm. I haven't seen it, but I'm very curious, because again, that's the thing, if it's over-editing because it has preferential changes, because again, the AI consider that it's better, then we are reducing the efficiency again because it's over-editing, right?
Exactly.
It's and also it depends on what do you mean by over-editing, but it was not. It was just that AI thought this would be a better translation, but in fact it was synonymic translation.
Yeah.
So both options were grammatically correct. The tonality was okay. So there was actually no difference. It was just another way of saying the same thing. Okay. And in just my statistics of those 100 segments, these were 40 segments. So it means for the post editor, just you read it, and then you see, which is actually the same thing.
Okay. That's interesting. So the large language models have their own opinion, and they might have a difference, they might have some issues, or we'd have to train them to make a difference between preferential changes and non-preferential changes.
I would say large language models are very opinionated.
Maybe a good
I love
question
it
to ask
how, and you would confirm your experience. I love it how they're talking to you. I've just corrected it because this is more precise and this is much closer to the source. And then when you read it, so we did some experiments with German native speakers, and just the linguists were laughing because obviously it was about like the tonality, the emotion, the engagement, and just the correction offered and categorized as accuracy major was completely wrong because it just did the word-per-word translation. So yes, a lot.
A good question to ask later to the prompt engineering workshop, I believe, right?
Yes.
So are we doing it right? Are we asking it
yes,
right? Yeah.
Please do so. I was just wondering, all those over-editings and preferential edits, that doesn't look like very human. Like sometimes we also tend to do that. I mean, humans as well. So
Yeah,
maybe
but that's the part where you
different.
actually train, right? Like a train and specific trainings for post-editing
Exactly.
precisely, and also in general for translation and revision and proofreaders. All of them are trained to actually just change what is incorrect for the sake of efficiency, right? So we can train humans to do that. I think it would be interesting to know how we can train large language models to also do that.
Question for the next section. Brilliant, that was brilliant. So I'd like maybe to bring another use case to the scene. Different is using LLMs to perform log QA at scale. So what does this mean? I think this is one of the most exciting potential use cases. So we've also experimented a bit with that. And we've been asking an LLM to first do a rating score and then do an error annotation score, and the results differ a bit. So we've seen more correlation with human judgment in the rating task rather than the error annotation. It doesn't surprise me because, I mean, even there's a human level in lack of agreement sometimes. So again, they tend to be or look like humans, LLMs. It's beginning to be a bit scary, honestly. But yeah, also still very super interesting because when you have when we're talking about creation of content at scale, and you were, I think, Jennifer, you just mentioned before, sometimes the sampling size is super small compared to what you're supposed to review. When you can't review everything, or even your sampling size is ridiculously small compared to what you're producing, then what can you do? So maybe LLMs can help with that. But then I'm thinking maybe of engaging humans into this workflow and have humans check the lowest scores, perhaps, and then bring us this error annotation, which is the part where the LLMs are like underperforming the humans. That's just an idea. But I think definitely we're not the only ones who are experimenting with that.
I think I would add that part that I'm very excited in terms of experimentation is, so how we said, large language models, because they're generic, it's all about the prompting, right? It's all about continue fine-tuning until they do the things that we want. So if we have a framework, if we can teach them to follow a specific framework, like, for example, MQM. If we teach them MQM, all the category issues, all the category levels, all the justification, then can we use then large language models to do quality evaluation using already a framework that exists? So there is a couple of papers very interesting, but I think the most interesting one is the one published by, I think it was Google plus and Babel.
I think so.
Right?
The link is also there.
Exactly, where they actually did that. They experimented on how they could do automatic evaluation in that case with large language models that had been specifically trained with MQM. I think when we, for example, we have very large quantities, very tight deadlines, when we really need to have, I'm not going to call it quality estimation because that is not the right term, but we want to have a little of idea of the quality, so then we can have the humans focusing on where are the target areas that we really need to check. I think this is very interesting, again, because it expands our capabilities that are very limited at this time because of time constraints.
I think before we move next, one of the biggest challenges for ourselves is like to identify what's the ugly, what's the risky, what we need to address, really where it's a must-have to plug in humans, and it relates to, say, the risk management that needs to be done before we go into the projects to identify which are the risks related to our content production, publication, delivery, and based on this, we should be able to at least estimate the cutoff limit between like the ugly that we have to work with, the risky, and then what we maybe tolerate. And there should be always someone who takes the risk on them for what we decide to be tolerated. So this is something that we have already touched upon a little bit. I'd say maybe Jennifer, you've brought a couple of very interesting discussion points in our preparatory chats about like the gap between us as the linguists and the engineers.
Yes, it's my favorite topic now. So machine learning engineers are our best friends because actually they're the ones that can help us to fine-tune, to improve, to validate. They are the ones that can implement our dreams. But machine learning is, again, in a discipline that is huge and is not specific of localization, so it has a certain way of working. And what I have seen is that in the engineering mind, right, efficiency is everything, and success means that they're able to build a model that doesn't need humans at all. So their goal is always going to be not to have any human on the loop and machine first. To the point that, for example, some of the experience they might do and they might offer to us is like, well, I can create a large language model, I can fine-tune it, and then I can create an automated metric that will validate the output of the large language model. So the machine will validate the machine, and we don't need humans anymore. So as a dream is great, right? But if the machine is validating the machine, how are we sure? To be able to get to that point, if we ever get to that point, we will have to have a lot of human validation so that we humans say, yes, actually, we can rely, we can this confidence level, and we can rely because we have trusted that. But as we mentioned, if we see that in some large language models, they have different types, different levels of performance depending on the language, depending on the infrastructure, depending on the quality of the data they have been implemented. So they have some errors, and then we have another large language model trained to validate the first that also has issues. So we are validating issues over issues, and nobody's actually realizing that because nobody's looking at that. So I think in localization, to be able to get to that, we first need to work on human validation and find ways to, and also then determine what is the level of confidence. Again, in machine learning in an ideal world is that everything works exactly the same no matter the language. So normally they build a framework based on English. They do fine-tuning in English, so the performance of a task in English. They get that data and they assume that the performance is going to be exactly the same in every other single language because they're just using the same framework. It's an assumption that they have because, as you were saying very well, right, there is a difference between natural language and coding and programming. Mm-hmm. So language behaves in a way that is much more difficult to standardize, basically. Mm-hmm. So because large language models works amazingly well in English, of course, Spanish, German, in all the big languages, it doesn't look like it's going to be exactly the same in smaller languages. And the reason why it doesn't work so well in those languages is specific of that language. So you will potentially need to do the fine-tuning or the prompting specifically for the issues of that language. Mm-hmm. So for machine learning engineers, the ideal would be just to have this round framework, one model that performs equally in all the languages, that all the prompting is language agnostic. I have my reserves on that. I mean, what I've seen is that language agnostic would be very tricky and that you potentially, in the end, will need to work in language pairs to fine-tune per language pair. That's my assumption. That's what I've seen. But yeah, that's what I'm seeing at the moment.
We see it as well, and it's a big challenge because if you have to go for language-specific or local-specific prompting, it's obviously a lot of fine-tuning and a lot of additional work. But interestingly, for instance, if you've got a project that contains like lots of very specific, or even it does not have to be lots of, but very specific instructions. For instance, imagine you localize a content that also contains some references to currencies, to payment methods, to licensing programs, etc. And now you localize it for countries in the European Union. What I saw in some cases, it was like you prompt for error, MQM error typology, including like local conventions, which is currencies, etc. But you've got countries in which you don't use euro, but you've got certain cases in which you want the content contain the price in euro, because it's an important thing for the content and for the message of the content. However, it endlessly keeps reporting major or critical errors for Czech content where the currency or it does not catch the problem that it's in the Czech currency, Czech crown, because it thinks, oh yeah, it's Czech locale, so it's okay. Whereas it's a critical error or very impactful error, since the instruction says it has to stay in euros. And though this is just one example, and in such cases you have to engage the prompt engineer, or you have to tweak the prompt, which might be working otherwise pretty fine, just to address individually all such exceptional cases, which of course adds to work, adds to time, adds to cost, adds to everything.
Yeah.
So
and it's not scalable, and it breaks this illusion of I can have just one framework, one set of prompts for all the languages, and it's going to work well for all of them.
And we've already talked challenges about the linguists, but I'd like to bring it up again as a topic because LLMs should help us. LLMs should help us be efficient, but how much efficiency do we gain on a linguist side if I get a content, or if I am operating in a tool that offers me all the luxury of clicking a button to get synonyms and clicking yet another button to get my content shortened for the particular length limitations, to have it adjusted for the right tone of voice, to just check which out of the options is better. Do you think any linguist would do it for this 0.00 nothing the linguist is paid? I don't think so. So on one hand, technology is extremely enhanced because it can offer all of the advantages and all of the benefits that we believe help linguists to be better, and definitely we want them to use all of the benefits because we've invested the money into this, and now, my dear linguist, you've got everything you need to deliver top quality. But how can they do it if they have to deliver within an hour, if they don't have time, if they are not paid for this one, or if they are paid for, say, quality scores, so for segments that indicate a high-quality score, but actually require complete rewriting, and that's the challenge. So we always should have keep the linguists on our minds. Is it for their benefit, or how do we balance these contradictions?
Yeah, some of these topics, we're going to discuss about them in the next session, which is going to happen upstairs with my, with my co-moderator of the MTPE Training Special Interest Group in Gala. But I don't know if Iveta is there. I'm going to ask for permission to bring some light or to do a sneak peek of what we've been talking about, because it's related to what Katka just mentioned. I think we are, with this LLM or AI-powered ecosystem, we tend to overwhelm the linguists with so many options. And yes, they can be useful, but in the end, I think there are so many takeaways we can take from the machine translation post-editing best practices. We can bring them also to an AI-powered scenario. And one of them, for example, is it's a very simple rule. I think it's called the 3-second rule, or some people call it the 5-second rule. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if it's 3 or 5, but what it means is that you as a linguist, you want to stay as much efficient as possible for your customers, and because that's your job as well. So if it takes more than 3 seconds to edit a segment, then don't spend any more time and in fixing here and there and just rewrite it. That's what it is. And maybe it could also be applied to this scenario of potential many options in a TMS or drop-down menus with so many options. And I just remembered this morning, I'm so sorry I don't know the title, maybe I can share with you later somehow. But there was, I have a friend who did her dissertation on translation, and it was a very practical one. It was on a TMS with a drop-down, offering so many possibilities on a drop-down menu. And he tested that very specific TMS on a large amount of translators, and the conclusion seemed to be that the translators didn't spend time in reading all of the options, because there were not only 2 or 3 more of them, but I don't know, maybe 5 or 10. So they just ended up picking up the first one. So what's the point of maybe offering so many possibilities? That's good, that's fine, but let's try not to overwhelm. And coming back to the idea of also bringing back the linguists to the loop and supporting Jennifer in her fight with the engineers, not fight, but...
partnership. It's a partnership we need to build.
You said friendship, let's call it friendship. Yes, again, a few takeaways we can take from the post-editing scenario. We also, I believe, we have the responsibility as buyers and our translation vendors to contribute to reskill the pool of linguists, the pool of evaluators. I mean, they could be translators, they could be evaluators as well. They deserve to know about the technology that we are using, and that's called transparency. And also we need to keep up, we need to continue discussing about a fair compensation method. If it was complicated with post-editing, now when AI comes into the scene, then it becomes really even more complicated, because if we are filtering down the segments that we send to the linguists, so we might start applying MTQE, locking segments that we believe could be perfect, then we also do assisted or semi-automated post-editing. What are we sending to the linguists, and how do we pay for that? I don't have the answer for that. It's an open-ended question, but we need to continue discussing on that.
And then back to the topic of LLMs and how they can build emotions, how LLMs and emotions, LLMs and cultural appropriateness. We see it that sometimes they are very opinionated and they are correcting stuff that is emotionally stellar, but simply because they look at something without this human touch, they change it. And this is something that is still ahead of us, how to explore it, how to train, which data to use for training, I believe, so that we are able to fit in all of the variances. Of course, it brings in the role of the references, the roles of style guides, for instance. Translators love style guides, especially if those are 100 pages long. But on the other hand, the more examples we are able to prepare and how detailed we are in breaking down the individual things, think of, we are not talking about the job anymore, we are talking about the tasks. And holistically, it can be like applicated for this scenario as well. So even though we may not need the style guides for the translators in such a detailed scope, we definitely need those for the LLMs to tell the LLMs what matters. And with the transfer learning, we need to figure out how it works so that we don't have to do the same thing for all of the languages, but we are able to use the benefit of this capability that sits with the language models. So this is new challenges ahead of us that require new skills, because if you have to think of how to say something to a machine, it's really challenging.
Yeah. I think the part that I've seen happening that is very interesting is, again, because with neural machine translation, right, the data is bilingual, right? So the neural machine engine makes assumptions or predictions based on that comparison, while for large language models is a lot of data in several languages, but a lot of data that doesn't have a direct correspondence with other language. So it makes assumptions based on predictions based on that data. but the quality and quantity of that data makes such a big difference, especially when we actually need our translation to be much more granular. I see, for example, language variants, one of the most interesting cases, especially for Spanish, because of course we have Spanish, neutral Spanish, Latin Spanish, Spanish Mexico, Spanish Spain, etc., right? So depending on the large language models, all of that is just labeled as Spanish. So when we want to use in some large language models, could be actually in content generation, but also could be in dubbing. So we're talking more about translation, but we also have used this for dubbing, etc. We see that we actually need a granularity that is very important, for example, in terms of the accent. We actually need them to have a specific accent. You cannot have a neutral accent in a language. Any speaker can always detect within the same language if that person is from Mexico or Spain or Argentina, or definitely that they're not from the country. So that level of granularity, again, in those languages that have different variants, also Arabic, etc., it is something that it is very important for the use, for the user experience, but because they at the moment, these large language models, they haven't been labeled and trained into that particular case. They could be potentially, but it's something that they're still lacking. And also they mix. They are a little bit inconsistent. So they mix sometimes formality. They do mix a little bit of formality. They do mix some terminology depending on the variant. But because the way they have been done, so it's a generic thing that now we want to use for our own purposes. We will probably need to fine-tune and to make it much more granular than what it is.
I think what you just mentioned, it could be, this randomness could be a bit intrinsical to LLMs.
Could be. That's the part, but that's when we also say experimentation is the key word. We don't know we don't know the limit yet.
Exactly.
We don't know how good it can, we don't know if now we're not there because we still haven't found the right way of prompting, because there will be another large language model that will be much better than what we have now, or because we will just find the limit. Like the same as neuromachine translation, at the very beginning the sky was the limit, and a lot of people thought that neuromachine translation would be so good that you would not need translators anymore. And now we have found their limitations. You can do certain things with machine translation without even post-editing, with light, with medium, and some things you still don't use machine translation. So here we still have to discover what is the limit of the technology.
And the limits are related not only to those nuances, but also to languages, because we still think big. We think about the most important languages from the localization focus, like, I don't know, tier 1, top 10s, pick whatever you want. But with the experiments I saw a huge difference if I took used maybe auto post editing or AI assisted evaluation, it doesn't matter. But if the language pair was German into English, the reliability and the results were much higher than if it was the other way around. And it's just German is a huge language if it comes to data availability, for instance. So what if there is really languages with much less data and markets for which content enablement is maybe much more critical and important than it is for ourselves in Europe. And with that, I am afraid, cautious of time, there is like the promised links to various research works. What Jennifer was talking about, it's the devil is in the errors. This is the study of the AutoMQM. We are providing the link to the MQM error typology, to the website that contains also downloadable formats of MQM core reduced typology, which, by the way, is identical what is also listed in the brand new ISO 5060 standard on quality translation, quality evaluation. MQM typology contains also MQM full typology, which has been amended for some specificities related to LLMs and NMT such as hallucination or inclusivity. And then it's just about reading. It's just a short excerpt of what's available. And with that, I believe we've come to the end of our show.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So many points to think about for everybody, I believe. Any questions from the audience?